Listing agreement, seller representation agreement, authority to offer for sale is the document that is used to establish agency between a seller and a real estate brokerage and designated representative. There are two types of listing agreements. One is MLS, and the other is exclusive. This is part of the representation series that I am providing through Brick by Brick, Building Wealth Through Real Estate. In this series, I'll be looking at and examining the different representation agreements that are in place to establish relationships between realtors and consumers. Welcome to another episode of Brick by Brick. My name is Nico James Bach. I am the condo whiz and broker at Royal LePage Signature Realty in downtown Toronto. Before any representation agreement is presented to a consumer, that consumer must be aware of the changes and the existence of TRESA, which is Trust in Real Estate Services Act. The way that realtors make the presentation known to consumers is through the RECO Information Guide. The realtor is responsible for presenting the guide to the consumer at the earliest possibility, so that the consumer can be well aware of the responsibilities and rights under TRESA, which was designed to provide greater transparency to the real estate transaction. These changes were asked for by consumers in order to provide that greater transparency. Working with a real estate agent, things you need to know, which is the title of the RECO Information Guide. The RECO Information Guide is divided into several sections. I'm just going to go through them quickly here as by way of an introduction to the different representation agreements. So working with a real estate agent is the first section. Before working with a realtor guide, before TRESA, it was a 1 or 2 page pamphlet, basically explaining the different types of agency. The RECO Information Guide is 11 pages long, so it provides a much greater amount of information and a greater in-depth explanation of the different types of agency and the rights and responsibilities of all parties involved. There's also the risks of representing yourself. Before TRESA, we were working under the Real Estate and Business Brokers Act. Under that act, there was a category called customer. So a customer was a consumer that did not sign a representation agreement. They signed what is called a customer service agreement. Customer no longer exists, so that category is gone. The consumer is either a client of the brokerage, so represented by one of the representation agreements, or is self-represented, so does not have any representation whatsoever by a real estate brokerage. Signing a contract with a real estate brokerage, so the guide goes into the ins and outs of signing a contract. Understanding multiple representation. Multiple representation is an area that has to be fully understood by consumers. So it has a separate section in the guide, and there are different documents that will show that the consumer has consented to multiple representation. Multiple representation it makes up part of this series, so another episode will dive right into multiple representation. How to make a complaint. So there's a section in the guide about complaints. If a consumer has a complaint with regards to a realtor that was involved in a transaction, then there are steps to take in order to start that complaint process. Getting back to the listing agreement. The listing agreement, if it's going to be on MLS, has to be for a minimum of 60 days. All agreements have to have a start date and an expiry date. It's front and center on this agreement. The name of the brokerage, as well as the name of the seller or sellers, plus the designated representative. So a designated representative is also a new category or term under TRESA. Before, there was just broker representation. Now there is designated representation. So under broker representation, the entire brokerage and everyone that works at that brokerage as an agent represents the client. Under designated representation, a designated agent, the one that is handling the deal specifically, is the one that is representing the interests of the client. The brokerage is offering services. The designated representative offers representation. There's also an area that indicates that if a listing brokerage signs an agreement, a listing agreement that exceeds 6 months, they must obtain the seller's initials. So there's a section for that. As well, there's a section where the seller initials that he or she is not party to another listing agreement. These agreements are for the seller, one seller, and one brokerage. So the seller has to acknowledge and declare that they are not part of another agreement, listing agreement with another brokerage. Next, we move on to the commission. So commission or remuneration is the consideration of the listing brokerage listing the property, and the seller agrees to pay the listing brokerage a commission. That commission, that total commission, is for the listing brokerage as well as any cooperating brokerage that brings the buyer and solidifies the deal. So according to this specific listing agreement, seller representation agreement, it provides for the listing agency to collect the total commission from the seller and divide that commission if there is a cooperating brokerage. If there's no cooperating brokerage, the total commission stays within the listing brokerage. The next section after commission is representation. So it explicitly explains what representation is. It also introduces multiple representation. As I mentioned, it will be part of its own episode, but the seller has to be aware that it exists and what it entails. Also, a finder's fee is mentioned in one of the clauses. So the seller acknowledges that the brokerage may be receiving a finder's fee, like a reward or other form of referral incentive. So anything that the brokerage receives in connection with the sale of the property has to be made known to the seller. Not the actual amounts, but the fact that the brokerage may receive additional fees. Referral of inquiries. This is important in that the seller agrees that during the listing period, The seller shall advise the listing brokerage immediately of all inquiries from any source whatsoever. So clearly, during the listing period, the brokerage is marketing the property. The designated representative is handling the promotion of the property. However, there's nothing to stop a consumer from contacting the seller directly. It may be just any kind of relationship, or maybe somebody passing by the property, or just a chance encounter. All of these communications have to immediately be reported to the brokerage, the designated representative. During the listing period, there is a holdover clause. So anything that transpires during the listing period, after the listing's expiry, anything that happens in terms of a transactional nature after the expiry may be covered by the holdover period if the origin of that transaction occurred during the listing period. It goes on to explain about marketing. So I mentioned marketing, and the seller is agreeing to allow the listing brokerage to show the property and to market it. After that, there is a section that once a listing has expired, the seller can choose to be contacted or not to be contacted by other real estate salespeople. So as soon as a listing expires, salespeople are made aware of the expiry, and they will look to see if the seller has given authorization to be contacted or not. After that, it mentions electronic signatures. The vast majority of transactions take place as a result of electronic signatures. They became legal and binding. Once that occurred, it got rid of most of the physical paperwork. So this is an acknowledgement of that the agreements are still binding even if handled electronically. There's room for all signatures, and of particular note, there's a section for the declaration of insurance, and this is the section that has to be completed by the designated representative to notify the seller that they are in fact covered by insurance, and this is a declaration. All registrants have to be in good standing under errors of omission and through the Ontario Real Estate Association and through RECO. So this is that declaration. All representation agreements must be reduced to writing. So in addition to this listing agreement, there are other forms. I won't go into all of them, but some of the more significant or common forms that are that can be presented to the seller during a listing agreement is Form 212, which is an amendment to the listing agreement. So any changes to the listing have to be in writing, and they have to receive the consent of the seller. Form 213 is a suspension of the listing agreement. So anytime a listing agreement has to be taken off the market for any reason whatsoever, it has to be in writing, and Form 213 handles that. Form 214 is a cancellation of a listing agreement. So the listing agreement can be canceled, but only through the use of this form, which all parties have to sign. If you are listening to this podcast and don't have the benefit of viewing the different parts of the listing agreement during your time listening to it, I will. There's a link to the video on YouTube of this exact presentation, where I go through the different parts of the listing, the salient parts of the listing agreement, So you can make reference to that. Just come back to this podcast and click the link, as well as all of my contact information. You can also reach me through my various social channels, LinkedIn, Instagram, my Facebook business page, and a personal page, as well as TikTok. All of the slides will be on those various channels, as well as obviously through the YouTube channel. That's it for this episode of Building Wealth Through Real Estate, Brick by Brick. Ciao, ciao.